We're going to get started. Alright, first I'd like to thank everyone for coming. I just want to tell you guys a little bit about ACS before we got started. So we're the American Constitution Society. We're relatively new here on campus, so I'm glad we have a pretty nice showing right now. And what we do, we deal with a lot of access to justice issues, equal rights things, and we were created actually as the antithesis of the Federalist Society. So just a different viewpoint here on campus. So we have a nice panel going on here today for prison and jail education programs, just to learn a little bit about what they do and how successful these programs have been. So we have representatives from the following programs. I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they're a lot more interesting than I am. So we have representatives from NYPEI, the PD Green Program, the Jeff Deskevich Foundation for Justice, and Hudson Link. So I'm going to get out of their way and I'm going to let them go with it.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
All right, great to be here. All right, so as everyone knows, but for the most people know, but for the benefit of those that don't, my name's Jeff Deskevich. I'm a 2L student here at the Elizabeth Hobbs School of Law at Pace University. I'm the founder of the Jeffrey Deskevich Foundation for Justice, which fights wrongful convictions. Specifically, we work to free people who are wrongfully imprisoned, and we also pursue policy changes which are designed to prevent the injustices from happening in the first place. My motivation for starting the organization is I was wrongfully imprisoned for 16 years, from age 17 to 32, prior to being exonerated through DNA testing, which not only reaffirmed my innocence, but also identified the actual perpetrator. While I was wrongfully imprisoned, I benefited from college education, hence my connection to today's event. So obviously we're going to be talking about inmate education, not wrongful convictions, but I just wanted to share a little bit of information just so you understand the context from which I come. So in the course of my wrongful imprisonment, I attended and graduated Corning Community College from 1993 to 1995, obtaining an associate's degree in liberal arts. From there, I completed an additional year of study towards a bachelor's degree. That was from Houghton College. And then George Pataki got elected governor back in 1995, and he decided it would be a good idea to cut state financial aid to prisoners for college education. Senator Helms was a major advocate of doing the same on the federal level, and so with no Pell and no TAP, all of the college programs left, and that was the end of that. So my reflections on when I was a prisoner and being in college, firstly, it really motivated me a lot to know that I could put a building block in place towards a potential future in the event that I would be released again. That was how I oriented all the programs that I took. And the college education program was the pinnacle. That was the height, far and head and shoulders above any of the vocational trades, all of which were obsolete. The prison had a college block in it, and it was a totally different environment than any of the other cell blocks. For example, I mean, the men there, we all formed we all had a community, and people were worried, they were focused in on their studies, thinking about the future. They weren't involved in, the prison politics. There was a tremendous motivation, to stay out of trouble, to go out of your way to tiptoe around the guards that otherwise might be predisposed to writing a misbehavior report at the slightest drop of a dime. People used to help tutor each other. I mean, there's a normal social dynamic in prison where if you don't know each other, you don't just start talking to people that you don't know because you're opening up the door for potential problems to arise. But that type of barrier, that communication obstacle, really wasn't present in the college block. Everybody there was friendly. You didn't have to put the mask on. People were tutoring and helping each other, giving back. I saw a lot of people that I knew from other parts of the prison in an earlier time, and I saw both their conversations and themselves, change from talking about war stories when they were running the streets, and maybe a little bit of plotting and planning, just loose talk, how the next crime would take place, and this time I'll account for the camera that did me in, this time I'll factor that in. So those kind of conversations moved past, and people were instead talking about different ethical theories and sociology, and people planning what they wanted to do in the event that they got the bachelor's and got back to the streets. A lot of people wanted to be drug counselors, and they wanted to be people who are working in nonprofit organizations that diverted people from going to prison in the first place, while still others wanted to have one kind of a job or another that would allow them to go back into the prison, but to be somebody there that actually wanted to help the prisoners, as opposed to some, not all, but some of the staff that were just simply there for a paycheck, and some of whose attitudes came to reflect the worst in some of the correctional officers who were less than professional. When I was released, although I had completed a lot of different programs while I was on the inside, the only programs that I took that actually helped me, that had an application in my life, were number one, learning to type. Number two, a little bit about the computer. I mean, to the extent that somebody released in 2006, whose last computer experience while incarcerated was 95, Windows 95. So I had a slightly more of a slightly less of a jump-off point than if I was just coming at it totally in the dark. But beyond that, without a doubt, was the college education that I received. As I mentioned, I was just a year away from the bachelor's degree, so I had that much less to go, in my pursuing my formal education when I was released, as compared to if I did not. Historically, I'll tell you that one of the programs that partners the Hudson Link, which I'll get to in a minute, and then Sean, of course, starting the program will do the bulk of that. But Mercy College, which is one of quite a few colleges that partner with Hudson Link, the dean of the college, Shelley Alkin, reached out to me and arranged for the school. This was all ahead of time without my knowing. She told me, look, I've lined everything up. You can have a full scholarship to finish your bachelor's degree, because the fact that I was 10 classes short of that made the newspapers as a human interest item, along with my having been released as a result of being exonerated. So I really look at that moment as kind of a intervention point in my life, because rather foolishly I was thinking that at 32, the time for me to go to college was long since over, and so I would not have gone to college had that offer not been made to me. And because it was, I finished the bachelor's, again keeping in mind that I was at that point to begin with, because I did do the education while I was in prison. And from there I finished the bachelor's, I went on to get the master's, and here I am now in the law school. So having personally benefited from the college education program personally, and witnessing the transformative effect that it's had, along with the experiences I've had interacting with people, former prisoners on the outside, some of whom were exonerated, but a lot of whom were not. A lot of whom, did something wrong to get there, and they earned their parole, and it turned their lives around and committed to crime-free life. And I always found that the formerly incarcerated people that were in college while they were on the inside and were continuing to do college, it was like the difference in talking night and day between them versus formerly incarcerated people who had never been to college, were not involved in that education. And so I became aware of Hudson Link, and ultimately Sean, to my left, will speak next, through my attending Mercy College. And so I began to go to their graduation events every year. In Sing Sing, there's graduation, and it's open up to the people on the outside, and I began going to their annual fundraising gala, which is a really, really super successful event that happens in Manhattan. And eventually, in my own personal story, about 5 years after I was out, I was financially compensated for the ordeal that I went through. So I was able to go from just simply attending as almost like a courtesy, to me. I went from that to, buying tickets just like anybody else would do.
And tables.
So on a modest way, I'm an annual donor of Hudson Link, and I love to connect them with additional media coverage. I have a great team. They don't need me, but I have a little bit of help. So a lot of the media opportunities and people that I've built rapport with, I've introduced Sean to members of his team, and I plug Hudson Link whenever I get. And so I guess maybe my last comment, I'll say this, is I've been around some of the other college education programs. Look, the mission is always great, right? You got to bring the college education, to the prisons. I mean, the recidivism rates, like 4% of people who, in general, who have gotten college education. Sean has an even better stat than that when it comes specifically to Hudson Link. But I guess my point is that in going to events of other programs, the other programs, while the mission is great, and anytime you got people bringing college education to prisoners, it's awesome. This outfit is head and shoulders, above some of the other programs, that I've attended. I mean, I think that that's because that the majority, the bulk of the workers are all formerly incarcerated people who went through the program or went through college education themselves, and they're invested. They troubleshoot, they think about things ahead of time, and they come up with, they identify potential problems, and they figure out ways, what they'll do if it happens, or how to avoid. And so with that, I'm going to move out of the way. I'm happy to have participated, in today's conversation, and I'll open it now for Sean to give his remarks as to Hudson.
Jeff was also the keynote speaker at one of those graduations. And I gotta tell you, we've had some amazing celebrity folks that have Tim Robbins and Ice-T and Warren and Doris Buffett, Harry Belafonte, Whoopi Goldberg. But having someone that sat in that seat come back in to speak and address the class is the most important speaker we'll ever have. And the students really feel that in every way. It's also, I think 5 or 6 of the students that have been through the program have been exonerated in the 19 years that we've been doing this. There is no correlation between college work and being exonerated. But the fact is, what I've found is that while you're in prison for 15, 18, 20 years, what do you do with your mind while you're there? Because they might be able to lock up your body, but the mind they can't touch. And I found that it is one thing to be in prison for something that you've done, and doing your time and serving it. It's another thing to be there for something you haven't done. And I know firsthand, I served 16 years of a 24-year sentence. I too went in as a teenager. I was 16 when I was arrested. New York is one of only 2 states that sentence their teenagers as adults. There was not a special prison that I went to. I went directly into the same prison as everybody else, and literally had to finish high school. I was in the 9th grade when I got arrested. You finished high school as well.
Yeah, inside of that. Yeah.
So I can tell you right now, whatever you might think about Jeff standing and talking about going to law school after being in prison for 16 years, it is a very different ball game to be in prison for something you haven't done. Everything changes while you're serving that time. The things you're thinking about, how you get through your day, how you're still fighting the case. I got arrested, my job was done. I served my 16 years and went home. I wasn't in court. I wasn't going back and forth to court while fighting that case. To be able to do that while going to college, while finishing your degree, and then after release to then go on and complete your second degree and then join law school, that's insane. And I mean that out of the utmost respect. But what I'm saying is, who here thinks while serving your 20 years, you would have also attended college while in prison? Nobody thinks they might have at least given it a shot?
I do.
Okay, all right. For me, I'm one of 5 boys. I grew up, my mom and dad were retired New York City cops. No one in my family had gone to college. So it wasn't just about getting to prison, serving a 24-year sentence, finishing high school. To walk into that prison classroom and try college, probably the fucking scariest thing I've ever done. Because none of us wants to fail, and you definitely don't want to fail. You think prison is rock bottom. You are completely wrong. Anyone can go to prison. Failing in prison, now that's rock bottom. So now being there, serving 24 years, I let everyone in my family down. I let myself down. I let my community down. Now I'm going to, say 2 years, 3 years into the sentence, yeah, I tried college, but I fucked that up too. That's a tough conversation. You have to deal with a lot of those emotions while you're going to school. Believe it or not, I was gonna say, believe it or not, I've always struggled in school. I have always struggled in school, but believe it or not, what gave me the courage to get into that classroom was the other men I lived with. So when I say that I went to prison at 16, I know many of you thought, oh, I do not want to hear the end of this story. This cannot end well. But the fact is, the staff, the officers, and the other men I lived with really raised me. Because in the 80s, it was very unusual to have 16-year-olds running around. Now, not so much. But the older men would literally make me go to school, make me do my homework, make me make my day. I know it sounds so funny, but I had no parents all of a sudden. Never really thought of it that way. I'm growing up in the largest cell block in the country. How is that story supposed to end? The fact is, these guys really looked out for me and made me go to school, even though I thought I couldn't do it. While I was going to school and finishing my high school diploma, and believe it or not, you have to have a high school diploma to get a better job in prison too. So, I wanted to work in the bakery, not just the mess hall, not just cleaning pots and pans. I had to get my high school diploma to get that job. So I went through the motions, got my high school diploma, the other men helped me get through the GED. When I graduated, I was going right to get that job. And the person in charge of the education department said to me, no, you don't just get this diploma. There's a graduation, it's at the end of the month, there's caps and gowns, there's a cake, and are you serious? Caps and gowns, it's A block, you know what I mean? But I didn't have a choice. I had to show up, and there was cake that motivated me, right? A lot of cake in prison. But I showed up, and I'm in this itchy cap and gown up on the stage. It was 127 degrees in the gym. And they handed me this scroll. This stupid, cheesy, rolled up scroll with a ribbon. And I realized it was the first thing in my life I had completed. Slightly embarrassing, but that was all I had. And after I finished and I got that high school diploma, still 22 years ahead of me to finish in prison, technically a good bakery job in the prison as well, hopefully in the future. But in the middle of all that, some of the other men that already had their diplomas, that were involved in the program, pulled me aside. Said, man, I don't know if you know it. It's great you're going for that job. It's great you finished your high school diploma. There's a college program here. Because there were 350 college programs in prisons around the country at that time. And I signed up. And they promised me that they were going to help me. I had 118 credits and no degree in 1994 when the programs were taken away. In all honesty, I didn't give a shit. No one else in my family had gone to college. I was really doing it because it was the only physical thing I could give back to my family. Like, hey, I might be an A block, but I'm doing something positive. And when it went away, I went to play basketball and I wasn't even good at it. And that wasn't a joke, but I really wasn't good at it. But it just didn't even matter to me. But it was the other men that already had their degrees that started to fight to bring, they did not fight. They started to advocate, right? Big difference between fighting and advocate. They started to advocate to bring prison college programs back. They had no money, they had no colleges, they didn't even have an email or a phone. 18 months later, they started a college program that I was the first to join. I'm not a founder of this program. I was in the first graduating class. As I was finishing that degree, my family was invited to come see me graduate. The GED graduation, there wasn't any family, there was no other personal connection to it. But the prison really wanted to make it as real a graduation as possible. And they had outside guests, and the commissioner come down, and the president of the college. My family came to see me graduate. To see me finish the first thing in my life that they could really be proud of. That's a lot of years to see your son finally do something. I was feeling very proud of myself. I had completed it. And I had a bachelor's degree in organizational management from Nyack College. And the commissioner president of the college, and the president of New York Theological Seminary were walking around the visiting area, thanking the families for coming, and the commissioner pulled me on the side, and he said, every year, as you know, 12 students get shipped from all the prisons, 60 prisons in New York, get shipped to Sing Sing for a graduate. It's the only graduate program in the entire state that operates in a prison. I said, there's an empty seat right now, and we start in 2 weeks. One of the guys couldn't make it, had a medical situation, wasn't able to start. And I remember saying, I don't know if I can do it. He said, I don't care, I want you there. And the commission tells you don't care, you go, you don't have a choice. And a year later, after an accelerated 5-day-a-week intensive program, I graduated with my master's degree from New York Theological Seminary. I didn't think it was real. How does the kid that gets arrested at 16, that didn't even finish high school, get a graduate degree? It's probably not the same thing that you guys went through. It can't be the same substance, it can't be. So when I walked out of prison, I got out early, I only served 16 of the 24 years. I had an invitation from Hunter College to take a scholarship to get their graduate degree for free. I'm not gonna lie, all I really heard was free. I signed up. And as I walked down to that campus, all I could think of was, this ain't gonna be the same thing. None of us wants to look like a dummy in that classroom. But I still showed up. It was a 2-year full-time program for the MSW. Within the first semester, most of the talents I brought to that student body were recognized in the study groups that we formed in ABLA were so transferable to other things. The way we studied, the way, all these different things that we learned to do in the most hostile environment while going to college were totally transferable to every student. Different scenarios, of course, but at the end of that 2-year program, the college president pulled me aside. He said, is there any chance I could talk you into being our graduate speaker to represent the class? I had totally underestimated my academic ability. I had totally underestimated myself. And accepted and said how proud I was to represent that class, as long as I could talk about prison up there in that stage. I got a standing ovation at the end of that. I cried through most of it, but nothing that we went through is much different than what you're going through as students, except that we went to a cell at night, and you went back to study, locked in a different dorm. So I think that a lot of what's transferable, a lot of what we're doing now together in the prison system, you guys know. So transferable in so many different ways. And I don't know, I'm lost track. But anyway, thank you so much.
Hudson Link, what Hudson Link does, how it operates, you gotta.
Yeah, come on.
Come on, you gotta, that's gotta be part of this.
So I walked out of prison 4 months after I graduated. When I walked out of prison, I wanted to give back. So I volunteered with Hudson Link. They gave me a chance to get a degree. We had 60 students. We were in one prison. We had one college partner. We had no budget. We had no money. And the commissioner asked if I would consider joining the board of directors. So I was honored to have a decision-making capability in this organization that gave me a second chance. And humbled and honored, I get to the first board meeting, and everything I said, people furiously wrote down really quickly. And I thought, am I the only one in the room that knows how to run a prison college fucking program? Yeah. And all of a sudden, I'm in charge. And the commissioner pulled me over within a couple of months and said, we really like what you're doing here. We'd love to invite you to come back into the prison as the director. Now, I literally earned 18 cents an hour for physically half my life. I went in when I was 16, I came home when I was 32. I said to him, I'm honored to be invited to be the director of this program, but we need to renegotiate my salary right now. I also said, if you're not expecting me to grow this program, I don't want the job. And I said, we need to serve men and women, not just men. We need to be in medium and maximum security prisons, because right now men are sacrificing going to a medium facility, because if they do, then they don't finish college. And we need to have some kind of reentry component, so that when we come out of prison, there's a safety net for us. Because there should be a plan B. And I remember the commissioner leaning over to the president of the board and saying, I don't think Sean understands how this interview process works, but they gave me the full reign to run the program. Now, 9 years later, we're in 7 prisons. We have a $5.5 million budget. We don't get any state or federal funding. We raised every penny privately. We have 2 reentry components. We now have a new housing initiative. We have 4 award-winning documentaries, and we're working on a 5th. So I am super excited to teach you more and show you more and explain what we do and how we do it. But really, the college programs that we run in the prison are what you went through, but harder.
What's the recidivism rate?
Our recidivism rate in 19 years is less than 1% compared to the national rate that's about 68%. So, oh, and we have the only college program in a prison in the country that's run and staffed by formerly incarcerated people. So the students that are running the program sat in those seats, and they'll go back into it to coordinate it. So it really sends some real street cred to what we do. And the commissioner and his entire team in central office have loved it. And we're now in the process of launching a 7th site as we speak.
Those are some tough acts to follow. So I'm going to keep most of the personal stuff out of it. My name is Alexander Schneider, and I'm with the People's Education Initiative, formerly Prison Education Initiative. It's a group of volunteers. We're not a 501c3. We don't have any funding. We don't have any staff or board members. We're just a collective, is what I call it, a collective of volunteers in New York City, coming from all walks of life, all different types of careers, ages, everything, and coming together because we're allowed to go on to Rikers Island, into the jails there, and teach evening classes. As I said, we're just a collective, so we're not affiliated with any particular school, with any type of classes, with any other organizations. So the classes that we run range from book groups and reading poetry and creative writing, to high school equivalency or science, and then everything in between where people get creative and bring in sort of what they do on a day-to-day. We have someone who's an architect. He's a partner at an architecture firm, has been doing that for, I think, 40 years or so. He goes in, and one of the classes that he likes to do is an introduction to architecture. And so all kinds of different classes, and what we find there is that we're creating a space, and what Jeff was talking about with community, and what Sean was talking about with people helping each other. And regardless of the class that we're facilitating, or the way it's done, or what people learn in the sense of taking knowledge out of the classroom, they find a community in that classroom, even if it's just for one night a week, for a couple of hours. And we're in jails, so you're all law students. You know the difference between jails and prisons, which most New Yorkers don't know. The population on Rikers Island at those jails is extremely transitory, right? People are there for one night, they're there for a week, they're there for 3 years, 4 years, unfortunately, right? I think the average stay is 60-something days, and that's taking into consideration all of the others. So our students are coming in from all of those different places, right? We're not dealing with a sentenced population which is there for a finite amount of time where you can sort of enroll in a class. We're going week to week, and our teachers have students who don't know when they're going to be released, who don't know really what's going on in their lives. And so there's a lot going on, and so we're able to go in and just sort of create this classroom. And the other thing that's sort of really interesting that a lot of our volunteers don't realize and come out with is that going into those spaces, and we work mostly with in the women's facility. So if I say the women in our classes, that's why. But we do also work with men and with young men in the juvenile facility on Rikers. But the students in those spaces have often had extremely negative experiences with education. Right? Maybe it's a school where they didn't do well for various reasons. Learning disabilities, mental health, school systems that are just underfunded, communities that didn't support their education, or classrooms that didn't support their learning styles. And so coming into a classroom, one of our goals is really just to give people a space where they can experience education in a new way, where they can come back. Maybe they're 50 years old. Maybe they never finished high school. We have people on the whole spectrum of education levels coming into those classrooms and sort of trying to reimagine what education can be like, and think about, okay, when I'm not in this locked facility, when I'm going back to my community, whether it's in a week or 2 years or 10 years, is there a way that I can take advantage of education? Right? Can I continue that? And so we try to sort of provide that and connect them to those resources as we're also exploring various educational opportunities and the topics of the classrooms. So those are all sort of the reasons why we do it. And our volunteers, as I said, are all working in various ways in New York City, and so have different schedules. So we try to work around our volunteers' schedules, and they teach 1 night a week with a co-teacher for support, as well as the long commute out to Rikers Island. So they can do it with a co-teacher, and work together to create and facilitate a class for 8 weeks at a time. Knowing that the students aren't always going to do 8 weeks, but maybe come in and out, but the teachers will facilitate an 8-week class. So they get our volunteers get an ID to go into the facility, and a little training from us on what that might be like, and then a lot of our volunteers stick with us for years. I've been with the group for 7 years now. Most of those 7 years teaching once a week on Rikers Island, and when I can't, just helping out with the group and figuring things out on the administrative side. And one other thing that I've sort of found is that there's a lot of this going on in New York, even if it's not connected. And so whatever opportunity, whatever time you have, resources you have, there are ways that you can connect and find ways to connect with education for people who are being detained, who are incarcerated, who are formerly incarcerated in the re-entry organizations. And hearing the stories from Jeff and Sean, those are the reasons, right? Those are the stories that make us want to give our time and volunteer and say, hey, people haven't always gotten that shot. Maybe I can give my time and provide even just 1 day of a really cool classroom experience for those people. So that's what PEI does. You can look us up at nypei.org, and I'll be here to answer questions as well.
How are y'all doing?
Good.
Hanging in there? Cool. I'm John Cortez. I'm a Queens native, and I work for the P. Green program, managing volunteer tutoring programs on Rikers Island. I got my education from Princeton. I majored in political theory and political economy, and I did independent research in criminal justice policy. So I've got some stats and numbers from some of the research I did that I might end up touting off to y'all. That's what these note cards are. So where do I begin? It's pretty interesting talking about education and prison. I can start from kind of my personal experience doing the work. I've been working with the P. Green program for 2 years, and when we started, it was very challenging working in Rikers Island. That was where the majority of our placements were in. And as Alex mentioned, it's a detention center, so the population is not, it's constantly shifting, so it's very challenging to coordinate services for these people. I grew up growing up in Queens, a lot of my friends, a lot of family members, they interacted with the criminal justice system. I was fortunate enough to be afforded a private education, even from the time when I was young, and I honestly felt that that made all the difference, especially since I saw how some of my friends across the street were getting treated. So, you know, how does that exactly relate to the work on Rikers? Well, it starts with people end up on Rikers Island because of a failure in the education system, period. The public education system in New York City. Now, I can't speak to national trends. I can only speak to where I grew up and what I see. And I had friends who were telling me I had to join a gang so that I don't get jumped, you know, going to class. Or, you know, I skipped class because, you know, I got my Jordans stolen from me, you know, trying to go to class the other day. I mean, just like awful things. And, you know, I remember in high school trying to help some of my friends out. You know, we would all get together, play basketball or handball in the parks, and sometimes I would say, hey, let's go to the library first, or, you know, let's go to the library after. And, you know, there was just so much working against these people. Now, one thing that Alex also mentioned is how some schools are underfunded. Now, I'm not sure if you're all familiar, but overwhelmingly funding for jails comes from the same general fund that funding from schools comes from. So as the penal system, as corrections have expanded, education funding is contracted. And moreover, the taxes that fund that is overwhelmingly from property taxes. So you're in a low-income neighborhood, you're getting low property taxes, so now you don't have much money to fund the schools, and increasingly you have a government system that believes in punishment more than education, so now that problem continues to get worse. How that leaves the state of education in schools and prisons, very underfunded, an afterthought. Why do people who committed a wrongful act, why do they deserve an education? I encounter that viewpoint all the time. You know, why are you wasting your time, John? There's so many other things you can be doing. Why are you working with these people? And to me, it's outrageous, because we think of second chances. A lot of times, these people haven't even been given a first chance. And everyone deserves a right to an education, everyone. Education empowers. Education is empowerment. I have been so empowered in my life through the power of education that it has motivated me and inspired me to do this work. So what are some of the stuff that the P Green program do? We recruit and train volunteer tutors. We started in 2008, so it's our 10-year anniversary. Actually started at Princeton University supporting incarcerated learners in the Albert C. Wagner prison there. Program went very well, and so we decided to do it another year, slowly started expanding, and over time, I think 2009 became a 501c3 and expanded into several other regions shortly thereafter. We're now operating in 7 regions. Last year, close to 10,000 volunteer hours tutored, which is really remarkable considering it started essentially as a student organization. Like, let's say you all got together and said, hey, like, you know, we're really motivated by this event. Let's go and try to do something about it, right? It's like if you all did that and then 10 years later you could come back and say this actually became something. That's what that was. You know, so it's really remarkable. Now, in New York, as Sean mentioned, New York is one of 2 states that incarcerates juveniles as adults, the other state being North Carolina. So that's 16 and 17-year-olds. For the majority of our time, we've primarily worked with 16 and 17-year-olds. The state has passed raise the age legislation, which is going to go into effect in October of this year, if not a little bit before. That's their deadline, October of this year. So the 16 and 17-year-olds who are on Rikers Island are now going to be moved off the island. Sounds like a great thing, right? Yeah. I mean, no, like, you should clap. Like, thank God they're getting off of Rikers. Like, it is a good thing. But that creates a whole host of logistical challenges in terms of educating this population now. Because where they're all, you know, gathered in one facility, now they're going to be spread out all over the place in New York City. Who are the teachers that are teaching these incarcerated people? They're DOE teachers, sure, but Mayor Bill de Blasio got rid of I believe what they called them were, I'm forgetting the name now, it starts with a B, but some blank room, It's a type of room where essentially in the basements of schools, they would have teachers who there were complaints or some sort of issues, some sort of punitive sanctions. They would have to go in the basement room, and they wouldn't be able to teach. They wouldn't really be able to do anything. They would just hang out there because teachers are tenured. Can't really fire them unless like they do something super duper egregious. And so that's what they were doing. De Blasio got rid of that, and now those teachers are teaching on Rikers. Now that's not to say those are the only teachers teaching on Rikers. There are people there who like really want to teach and who do a phenomenal job, but they're the minority. So, you know, these are the challenges that we deal with and that we face with. So we've had a lot of success pairing tutors, individual tutors with students. That's what we continue to do. When I came on board, we had about tutor base of about 25. Now we have about 70. We have really expanded our programs on Rikers, and now we're starting to support the adults. In anticipation of the population movement with Raise the Age, we have gone into the actual juvenile detention centers. Yes, the ones that are meant to serve actual juveniles, so 16, 17-year-olds should have been there the whole time. That's neither here nor there. We've placed ourselves strategically in those facilities now so that once that population movement occurs, we'll still be able to continue our support of them. Meanwhile, within Rikers Island, we've shifted our work to the adult population, which is a whole nother story. Everyone wants to intervene with youth. A lot of people oftentimes forget that they're also adults incarcerated, and there are significantly fewer programs. I've been in jails that there are literally zero educational programming whatsoever for incarcerated people, specifically detainees, because there are no laws that require educational programming for detainees that are adults. It's not until they're sentenced that the state requires everyone to be enrolled in a high school equivalency class if you don't have a GED or a high school diploma, or they require you to work. Those requirements aren't the same when you're not incarcerated. So this is a whole segment of the population that doesn't get discussed, that gets ignored, doesn't get talked about. Last thing I'll leave you on, or two more things. So just some one quick stat. So 70% of state prisoners are high school dropouts. This is according to 2015 stats. Average state prisoners have a 10th grade education level, with about 14% of them having below an 8th grade educational level. So clearly the need for education is there. Now, I kind of lose track on where I wanted to go from that. Rand Corporation did a study showing recidivism. Every dollar spent on recidivism is a savings of $4 to $5 in reoffending rates, since it costs on average $60,000 in tax-paying money to incarcerate one person in New York State. On Rikers Island, that's over $200,000. Over $200,000. It's the most expensive correctional system in the world. It is the largest penal colony in the world at almost 400 acres. So I forgot the original point that I was gonna end on. I was hoping that I would recover it in saying some of those things, but at any rate, if any of you would be potentially interested in getting involved with the PD Green program, you could check us out at PD Green, P-E-T-E-Y, green with an E at the end.org. We are working in some state facilities that aren't particularly far. Sing Sing isn't.
We've partnered with PD Green.
Yeah, and Hudson Link, I mean, really, like, the success they've had, that's definitely something we would like to have. Their story is very encouraging for us, how they started out without an operating budget. Very similar to how we started out. If any of you are interested in getting involved, of course, you will all be here to answer some questions, float some questions afterwards, but you can check us out at pdgreen.org, see me after, we can chat, so on and so forth. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you really for your interest in this topic. This is so important, so thank you.
So one quick thing I want to say, and then we'll open for Q&A. With a view to having college education restored back to prisons just as a state program, because it is something that's occasionally, still discussed. I wanted to just address the argument that was used, the rhetoric that was used in initially justifying removing the funding. I mean, the argument was, why should people, why should prisoners get a free education, and I can't afford to, send my daughter or son to college, and they've never committed a crime. So, two answers to that. Firstly, and I know this because I went to college filling out the same Pell and TAP financial aid forms that would have been filled out on the outside. So my point is that the forms are the same, the criteria is the same, and nobody who would be unable to go to college while free would suddenly become eligible just because they were incarcerated. So that's a really important thing to understand. And second, I remember reading a magazine article. This was between 1993 and 95. It was on the topic of prisoners going to college while incarcerated. And the article said that it was, that nationally, I don't remember now if it was 0.5% or 1.5%, but of the total number of people across the country that went to college through financial aid, one of those two figures were prisoners. The rest were not. So the point of that I'm trying to make is that it's not like for every prisoner that's going to college through financial aid, there's a corresponding person who's free, who's being denied that opportunity because the funding is taken. So those two things are really important. And then just the recidivism rate, you know, there's a really high recidivism rate, and to cut that and to save that money, because a prisoner who's released now has skills, they've had their horizons broadened, you know, they're more marketable with the college education, to equip them to get gainful employment. Because think about it, if somebody is released from prison and they have, you know, no college education, no skills, all right, that person versus someone who does have the college education, who's able to get a job, who do you think's more likely to resort back to their old ways, right, committing ultimately an economic crime? You know, and the money of incarcerating them can be saved. We don't have to have a second victim, and you know, the arguments go on from there. But everyone understands that. So those are the points I wanted to make. So with that, if we're open for questions.
Any questions?
They'll also all be up. You guys are gonna hang out for a few minutes, right?
Yeah.
They're all gonna be up there if you guys wanna ask some questions or anything. There's still food, so eat.
I have a question.
Professor Moshler?
Yeah, well, thank you all for coming. It's really inspiring to hear what you do. The power of education, bringing it here, just isn't. It's really shining a light where it's got to be. I want to ask you if the world was really a just place, and we had enough education in prison for everybody who really needed it, what percentage of people in prison today would be in college?
It's a really good question. I gotta say, what these guys are doing is 10 times harder, and I'm not exaggerating, than what I do. I'm in 6 going on 7 maximum medium security prisons for men and women, but I have them. I know exactly who's gonna be there every day. To not know what student's gonna be in that classroom every day, and to work with a student for months and then just never see them again, it's completely different. Not to mention the students they're working with don't know if they're going to be there tomorrow or be serving 20 years tomorrow. So to mentally have the capacity to be sitting in there being tutored in the classroom, it's just 2 different worlds. I would say there are some states, we're helping Tennessee and North Carolina right now build college programs that don't have much of any kind of educational programs in the entire system. Whereas in New York, there's 27 college degree granting programs in the 54 prisons. It's a very different world here in New York. What we're able to do, working hand in hand with the Department of Corrections. Most of these states, if you're formerly incarcerated, you're not even allowed to visit. We actually have formerly incarcerated people currently on parole running the sites. So New York has thought very differently. And I gotta tell you, I grew up in 9 different prisons over those 16 years. I had no idea what I was getting because I was just so angry most of the time. It's my job not just to bring education in, but to also talk to those young men and women that I'm working with to say, I get you're angry, take advantage of what we have right now while you can, because there's a part 2 to this story, and you're not going to be ready for it if you don't take advantage of what's here right now. So I think probably 10% of our 54,000 men and women are college ready. And that's nothing based on anything statistically. You might have a different opinion, but just in what the students that I work with, they're probably 8 to 10%.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
I could follow up real fast. So what is the unmet need? How many do you have?
Well, I think that well, first of all, the unmet need is the prep work, the pre-college work, because the education level that is obtained in the GED programs, that's not really a quality education. That's the big need.
yeah, to piggyback off that, so we know the population overall is about 2.2 million of incarcerated people. 70% of them are dropouts, so 30% are eligible. That's around like 650,000 people that we're talking about who can feasibly go to college while in prison, right? But as Sean noted, New York is very unique in that we have quite a number of college programs. Not every state's like that. And then it's particularly challenging to be motivated. I mean, there are myriad challenges. I mean, I'm sure you all know, just like being a college student in general is really stressful. Being a law student, I'm sure, is even more stressful.
No stress?
So you know, now, like put that on top of you know, prison or a jail sentence, a prison sentence, which you know we can't really begin to fathom. You know, it's a tough question to ask,
Yeah.
but I would say with what Jeff said, the need is definitely the prep work.
Remedial stuff.
Yeah, the remedial stuff and college readiness. So even for the people who do obtain their GEDs, a lot of times what we find is we'll recruit them for college classes or even college readiness classes geared towards an admissions exam, and the students aren't quite prepared for that. They need like another course. And it's a little bit challenging as like me, you know, volunteer organization. Like I see this happening, but it's out of our purview to like introduce curriculum. So like, while I would love to just like come here and write up a curriculum, and you know, I could get volunteers to come in. You know, it's something that's beyond the scope, and that's a need that's really not being met, I would say.
Mr. D?
I have many questions, I just want to figure one. What's the, obviously there's, to some extent, the prison system's a dumping ground for people with mental health problems.
Yeah.
And some of those mental health problems, I mean, people could have a GED or be college eligible in terms of paper qualifications, but because of mental health problems, there are issues with being able to be in an organized classroom environment, be able to focus, be able to do the work. And I'm not even talking about literacy too, which is another issue, right? You can tell me about that. But I'm just interested in how you deal, and I can't even imagine in Rikers when you're dealing with transitory population, where you can't do follow-up, and it's probably hard to do individual counseling and work with people individually. How do you square that circle? Working with people who have the capacity intellectually, but who are also struggling with mental health problems, maybe also drug addiction and alcohol problems.
Let me just speak to how it was done as a state program, and then Sean will deal as to there. So while I was in the college program, there were people that were in college who were housed in a special mental health block, and so and we knew who they were. So basically, they came and they learned just like everybody else their mental health issues, which they clearly had because that's when they were in the mental health block, didn't stop them from attending classes and passing. You know, I would say also just that there was a lot of encouragement and tutoring that went on in general, and they were paid special attention to people. Prisoners went really out of their way to offer them, you know, extra help. That's in terms of how the state, you know, how it was done in the state program.
I think it's actually one of the interesting pieces that no one talks about. The idea that still today in most prisons around the country, you know, if you're a white guy, you stay with the white guys in 8-block yard, and same goes for everybody. But that rule, that barrier, the unwritten rule, gets dropped in the classroom. So while I might not be able to hang out with some of these guys safely, I can in the classroom. And it opens up, I mean, for me as a 16-year-old that went in, being told you hang out with this group, and that's it. It didn't really broaden my world much. But now I'm in a classroom, the most diverse classroom that I've ever been in my life, because there's every race, every culture. I mean, the prison is a melting pot. So it was such an education beyond what was just in the book. that for me, I grew up really being raised by these older black men, getting educated in so many other ways that, I mean, and also religious-wise, men that were Muslim or Buddhist inviting me to worship with them. Not trying to convert me, but just as we're a community here, would you come with me to the mosque this weekend? And it was just such another education and humbling to worship with other people as well.
And do you think that dynamic helps kind of supervene over these other issues, like people who come in with disabilities, with people who come in with mental health issues?
If you're in
Still-
A block and you have a mental health problem, you either hide it or you go to a different block and get locked in the same area with everyone with a mental health problem. It's not a fun place to be in. So you're either really good at hiding it and just deal, or you go to this block. But now all of a sudden, in this block, you come to hang out with us in the classroom and get accepted as an equal and learn it. It was a great opportunity for those men to deal with other things as well.
And how about the teachers? How did the teachers deal with these issues? You're talking about how the community deals with the issues.
The teachers did not deal with that. They taught, and that was it. We dealt with all the other aspects of raising each other in a community that there was no other resource.
But a different part of the answer to that, and I agree with that completely, is that a common thing we heard from all the teachers from that were coming in and teaching, they loved the experience, and they said that they felt they personally got a lot more out of teaching prisoners than what they were in classrooms on the outside. And they cited two things in support of that. They said, firstly, that the students that were incarcerated, that we asked a lot more questions. We weren't shy about that. So there
And
was
also
that.
Jeff, I'm sure you asked a lot of questions.
Raising your hand, even if you're not sure if you're right. In this
Yes.
classroom, right, in traditional classrooms, you don't raise your hand unless you're pretty sure you're right. Imagine being in a classroom where everyone's just raising and dialoguing and building a discussion, whether you're right or wrong. It's such a richer experience. And I gotta tell you, I'm working on my MBA right now. I'm not gonna say what school, but the classroom experience sucks. My prison college experience was way better.
The other thing I want to say is that the teachers found, like, they said they found like there was a lot more original thinking and content when it came to writing papers.
Two quick things, sort of in answer
Then
to
we'll
you.
go up to Professor for that.
Yep, with the caveat that my experiences with college programs are one that I didn't participate in at all, which is St. John's does some work on Rikers Island.
Yeah.
And I have heard stories from there, and then I also helped to tutor and do some sort of assistant work for Manhattan College, I think it was. They also do a college program on Rikers. Those are both not full college programs. They're classes. And so the two things sort of in answer to your question are that the students chosen for those go through a rigorous review process, and so there are no students in those programs, and a lot of the programs, I think, probably nationally, who are dealing with mental health issues that would impact their education, where you would need additional resources or things like that. So we're not at a point where there's enough education where that's even needed, because we're only dealing with the a small section. So that's one thing. And then the other aspect of those is that they were easily able to find folks like me, and through the PD Green program, for additional tutors and assistants to come in and work with students on the side. So teachers were able to sort of handle students' additional needs in that way too.
Professor Gershman?
Years ago, we had a professor here named Phil Blank. They have a lecture series named for him. He was a prominent lawyer in White Plains Bar Association, and somehow he started a program, and he brought me into it, teaching. It's a paralegal program at Sing Sing. We taught, I would go there a number of years, almost every year.
I heard it was really hard. I stayed away from it.
It was an amazing program. They would get certificates at paralegals.
Yeah.
We had a graduation in the gym, that their families would come. These are people who are gonna be there for the rest of their life, their families would come, their children. It was, just extraordinary. And I remember it ended, and I just can't remember whether it ended because of, I was getting paid, but it ended because of funding or something happened. And I don't know, do they still have anything like that?
The paralegal program is completely stopped at this point. Off the record, everyone was suing everybody. It got really ugly.
They loved it. They would ask questions. Obviously, a lot of it was self-serving.
I can't tell you any legal issue that I had in the prison, because I was not legally adept. The other prisoners did all my legal work, because they got trained with you guys. It was a powerful, powerful program. One of those guys is working at Skadden Arps right now.
One of them was a clerk for a federal judge.
Yeah. Richie served 22 years and came home
Clerk for a
and...
federal judge, and that was one of the top lawyers in the city, representing persons who were have criminal records or want to get.
I know at least 4 of those guys that are currently working in law firms and doing very well.
But I think the experience, just in the classroom experience, was exciting, even if it didn't go anywhere.
And you know what? I get this argument quite a bit about they're not even going home. Because most of the programs that look like us, you have to be 18 months or 2 years to be released. You have to have certain crimes and certain times and never first offense. And fuck that. You're either a prisoner or you're not. And don't quote me on that. But the fact is, if you want to go to college, you sign up. I'll get you in the program. And the reason I say that is because, yeah, you might never go home, but your kids are out there. And the movie that we did with PBS was called First Degree. It's the majority of our students are the first in their family to go to college. Knowing that that's the population, there are far more implications than just the person sitting in that classroom on what a college degree is going to do.
And just to sort of boost that message, a lot of the women who go to our classes on Rikers Island, as I said, it's not a degree program or anything. They're just there for maybe one night or a week or 6 months. And a lot of them, they just want to help their kids with homework.
Yeah.
They just want to be able to talk on the phone and to be able to do a math problem with their 8-year-old.
Yeah.
And so it's those family connections.
And just to speak to a different level of value on the education, people that aren't going home. I mean, the prisoners who had college education, they stayed out of trouble, not just while they were in the program, but just throughout the duration of their sentence. So they were a lot more manageable for the prison administration. They were less inclined to get in trouble. They thought ahead. So even on that, if we got to go to that point, if everything else fails and we reach that low point, that's still a valid line of reasoning, I think, to be in favor of college education for prisoners.
I always joke that the downside of growing up in prison is I grew up in prison. But the upside is all my friends are now the wardens or the deputy commissioners. So we recently got pulled up to Shawanagon, which is the most secure prison in New York State.
Yeah.
It looks really pretty till you realize that most of it's underground. And then we have about 60 students currently enrolled there. It's a maxi-max. We were submitting a list to add an additional 18 students to the program. And it's about 2 months ago, right before the semester started. And they called Sammy, our program the director, who's the first alumni to go home and get his doctorate degree, by the way. They called us up there to meet with the warden to talk about these 18 names. And they said, this one name, look at his history. He's been in prison for almost 30 years, serious gangbanger, selling drugs, using drugs, this whole litany of offenses. And, but he fit the criteria that you have to be drug-free and disciplinary-free for 18 months to be eligible for the program. So we want you to buy in, not just be able to do the schoolwork. And Sammy said to him, I know him because I was part of that gang 25 years ago. He's a bad dude. You are completely right. But he fulfilled everything that you asked him to do. And I will also say, while he's eligible right now, and he's working on his 29th year in prison, and he's not going home anytime soon, all the young guys that are just getting to this prison, that are serving 25 years to life, would do anything to impress this guy. His reputation is bigger than Capone's. And it's a pretty small prison. There's only a few hundred men there. You let this guy into this college program, they will put down that knife and pick up a textbook. I guarantee it.
Any other questions? or-
Any other questions?
I had a brief question.
As he picks
Because
up
I came in
his
late, I
chicken.
really apologize.
Yeah.
I'm also starving, so I won't apologize for that.
Such is the life of a student.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pardon my ignorance for a little bit, but, so I remember, so President Clinton made the argument you made and pulled the federal funding, right? Hasn't been instituted again since, right?
And then locally, they instituted right behind the president.
And so are there states that have good state funding, or is it basically all left up to nonprofits?
There were 350 programs around the country, so when it was announced in '94 that the federal Pell funding was being pulled, some of the states could have kept on, just because it's so inexpensive to run these programs, that really the TAF alone would have done it. But, you know, locally, they're gonna follow what the feds do. So, when that was happening locally, every one of those programs, except for BU in Boston and Villanova in Philly, those two colleges said, you know what, this has been way too important, we're gonna do it on our own dime. For the rest of us, I remember I was in Skidmore University. They, midway through the semester, came in, packed their books and left. Money was done, good, yeah, bye.
Wow.
I had 118 credits and no degree.
I sort of have a follow-up question.
Go ahead.
So, when it comes to like the mental health issues, state inmates have some legal remedy, right? They can sue, and I was a part of a case against my home state, a state prison and state county jails under the ADA for mentally disabled people. Is there any other? The professors probably know more about this that can weigh in too.
Yes.
Are there legal remedies that can help in this matter to, we don't really have a right to a college education, but
Well, the other tricky part is, my waiting list is 2.5 years long. So, yeah, it's great, I could legally get you into the program, I don't have a seat for you. So on top of the waiting list being that long, if you get a disciplinary infraction during that 2.5 years, you lose your seat anyway. If you get a disciplinary infraction while you're in that program, you lose your seat anyway. So it's really tricky for us, because I want to advocate and get every single person that wants to go to college in there. I don't have the capacity or the funding. I raise every penny privately.
One technical issue here too is that, there's kind of the assumption here that everyone who has a mental health issue has been screened for that mental health issue. And that's the big issue, is that that's not the case. And DOJ, they've admitted to 15% in prisons, 24% in jails of people who have mental health. So those are people who have been screened, who have been diagnosed. That's clearly an underestimate. Overall, there's, according to a 2014 report, 356,000 people in jails and prisons with mental illness. Now, if you compare that to what mental health hospitals are currently serving, they're currently serving 35,000 people. So we're talking not even 10% of the mental health population in jails and prison that are officially recognized, right? We know the figure's a lot higher than that. Only 10% of that figure is actually being served where they should be served, in a mental health hospital. And compare that to when mental health hospitals were at their height in having patients. That was in 1955. That figure was 558,922, compared to 35,000. So where'd all those people go? Did mental health just disappear? I don't think so. We're incarcerating mental health. That's what's going on.
And I was in the system in the 80s when they shut down the 3 big sites here in New York. And we watched the prison population shift and change and grow with those people. Because they either became homeless, found another institution, or came to prison. And it was insane.
I think time is upon us.
Guys, thank you so much.